I am Marlon Weems, and I'm the publisher of the Journeyman, a newsletter that explores the intersection of politics, money, the economy, and race, and how those things all overlap and crisscross each other. And nothing much going on this week, but I say that in all sarcasm. Um, But one of the things, I guess a couple of the big things that have happened this week have involved Argentina and Venezuela. So I thought it would be interesting to talk about that. But while folks are populating, I see some familiar names. Hey, Kimmy, how you doing? And a few new names. I see my friend Arturo Dominguez is here in the chat. And I'll bring him in a minute, but I just wanted to, kind of let a few folks get situated. And while you're doing that, I guess, a couple of shameless plugs won't hurt anything. Um, be sure to hit the heart button. People tell me that makes the algorithm do what it's supposed to, which is elevate the conversation. So, that certainly helps a lot. And if you're not already a subscriber, think about hitting that subscribe button. It certainly helps. I've actually got a little challenge, contest, goal, whatever you want to call it. I'm trying to get the Journeyman to 20,000 subscribers, and this was something that I sort of put out there. I guess a couple of weeks ago now, and the response has been great. I certainly appreciate everyone who has, sort of picked up the gauntlet and become a subscriber. Also, something that I'm doing over the Indigenous Day holiday, which I guess goes through Monday, is knocking 20% off the cost of becoming a paid subscriber. So, if you're able, that certainly helps us keep up the work. And from what I can tell, it's sorely needed in terms of what we're dealing with regard to traditional or legacy media. They're kind of failing us, folks. So so it's on us, I guess you could say. Um, Dr. Elizabeth Glasgow, welcome. Good to see you. Tina Tyler, good to see you. Susan Barrera, welcome. I guess without any further ado, I will try to bring in Mr. Dominguez. If I can, if you'll bear with me just a second. And I am inviting him, and hopefully he will jump in just a second. While he's coming in, just a brief introduction. There he is. How you doing, Arturo?
Oh,
Let me
good. How you doing,
let
man?
me. I should have done this, and I'm gonna work on my skills as a host. But Arturo and I have known each other for, I guess, now 2 or 3 years. We originally met in the Writers and Editors of Color, which is a consortium of writers and editors of color, uh, s- um, as the name indicates. And I have found Arturo to be one of the best independent investigative journalists when it comes to, um, just the discussion of what's going on with regard to immigration issues. He's very knowledgeable, um, has been published across several platforms. And whenever I want to talk about anything south of the border, as in Cuba, in this case, Argentina and Venezuela, he's kind of my go-to person that I want to rely on. So, welcome to the conversation, Mr.
Man,
Dominguez.
I appreciate it, Marlon. I appreciate the kind words too. I try to keep up with what's going on, with particularly with my people in Cuba. But,
Yeah.
it's you can't just if you're gonna cover anything in Latin America, you kind of have to cover it all. But yeah, that's kind of where I've been. I've been following Venezuela and reporting on Venezuela for a long time, ever since Hugo Chavez came into power, and his
Okay.
popularity was really hard to ignore. So, I started digging into why he's so popular, and the stuff that he
But
brought into
we're
that
not
country.
supposed to like Chavez.
Right, right. We're not supposed to.
He's
But,
supposed to be bad.
and people use Chavismo as like almost like a slur, like, oh, it's bad if and most of Venezuela is Chavismo, right? Because Chavez, when he came into power, one of the things that he did was kind of like the same thing Castro did, was basically tried to desegregate, civil rights for everybody, you know, black Venezuelans, indigenous Venezuelans were finally being seen, and there's legislation to protect their communities and things like that. So despite everything being as rough as it is in Venezuela, one of the things that we don't confront here in the United States is how popular Chavismo is, because people feel seen, and they feel like they're being heard. Um, when you look at opposition in Venezuela to Maduro, there's 10 different political parties that are considered opposition to
Okay.
Maduro. Machado is part of one of those. She represents one of those opposition groups. And hers is a far right group. You know, they gained popularity by being very vocal, like MAGA is, and like the way they targeted DEI and CRT and all these things that are supposed to help non-white groups, marginalized groups. Machado's opposition party came into power by doing just that, targeting the
So wait,
Chavez.
they're doing the same thing with regard to DEI and that type
But
of.
sin Right, right, like, they don't call it DEI, but, all of everything that they put in place, the legal frameworks and stuff to protect indigenous people and, Afro-Venezuelans, is one of the things that they went after. You know, a lot of it is centered around, like, anti-whiteness type nonsense,
Hmm.
and Venezuela is a really, really diverse country, and it's pretty safe to say that white people are the minority there anyway. Um, but because it's a Latin American country, everybody just identifies as Venezuelan, right? So it's not a lot of people don't bring race to the forefront very often, and that was an issue in Cuba for a long time. One of the things Castro admitted to doing wrong was ignoring the issues of racism. Um, and I think that because of these policies that bring a lot of these things to the forefront, the oppression of marginalized groups, I think, the most of the people that used to be in power, which were mostly white Venezuelans, took offense to that.
Hmm.
Just like white people think it's a slight against them here. Um, so like that's where you see a lot of this opposition come from. I'm not saying that the whole party is racist or anything like that, but these are just some of the issues that we don't discuss in the US, right? So like State Department propaganda wants to make this to seem so simple and say, Maduro's a dictator and Chavez was a dictator, and you could say that all you want, but Chavez won his election by huge margins. And
Hmm.
no matter how much they tried to cry fraud, they couldn't find any.
So
And
I guess the current president won, it's been what, a few years ago, right?
well, the last election was last year, last summer.
Well, then, but he was reelected. He was already president, correct?
Right. He was in power in 2017, right?
So didn't, and you correct me if I'm misremembering this, but I seem to remember when he originally won, we almost tried a coup or something, did we not?
Right.
And he
Well,
tried to.
when Chavez won, they would try to a coup almost immediately, in '02, and they pushed him out of power, with small, guerrilla type
But it
groups.
really didn't last but what, a day and a half or
2 day 2 days, right? It lasted 2 days. And here's the thing, Maria Corina Machado was in the presidential palace when the person who couped Chavez was in power and suspended the Constitution. His first act was to suspend the Constitution because the new Constitution protects all these people. He wants to throw that out, you know, and wants to go
Mm,
back to the old way. And that was a huge tell right there for me. For me, that
okay.
was a major tell. Um, you know, that being said, it's again, I don't want to sit here and say they're all racist and this is all solely racially driven, but it is a huge,
It's a
uh, uh,
component of
right, a motivating factor,
it.
and that's kind of what brought this opposition party to the forefront. Now, you listen to Maria Corina Machado today, and she's still basically saying the same things about going back to a different time, so to speak, and you know, she wants to do a lot of the things Milei is doing. She
Hmm.
uses Javier Milei in Argentina as an example, which is kind of funny that we're talking about these
Yeah,
two today.
well, I did not see how we could talk about one without the other one because these two things they're happening kind of in tandem,
Right.
and the Trump administration seems unusually focused on these two countries in different ways, but so that's kind of what got my made my spidey sense go up, so to speak. Now, you know, and I'll be honest, and you actually checked me because when this woman Machado won the Nobel Peace Prize, my first reaction was, how ironic is this that
Right.
Venezuelan would win because we're, doing everything we can to go to war with these people. And so I didn't know that much about her. And so, we kind of exchanged some messages back and forth, and I started looking into it, and I'm like, well, hang on a second. I need to educate myself. And so I read up on her a little bit. Um, what is interesting to me, this came out last week, that the current administration had tried to cut a deal to sort of appease Trump by offering the United States, I think it was 10% of their oil, right? And I saw this maybe Friday, I think it, and I haven't had a chance to really dig into it, but it's like, here, take some oil, you know, and of course the United States is already in, I would assume, both of these countries. I know Chevron
Oh,
is
yeah.
is deep, so
Right.
what I found interesting about this was, and I wouldn't have noticed it had it not been for the fact that Machado had just won this Nobel Prize. Apparently, she made a separate offer. They didn't really go into the detail, but apparently she pitched something to the United States like an alternative as the opposition leader. And then you look up, and what, once you sort of put it in perspective, then what happens? She dedicates her Nobel Prize to Trump. Trump picks up the phone, calls her, congratulates her, puts it, and you're just kind of going, "Wow, maybe this was, maybe this wasn't anywhere close to being as good of a thing as we thought it was."
Right, right. You know, she couldn't run for election, right? Because of all the
She's been banned from
multiple.
politics, has she?
Right, right. And like, you know, you read the AP or the Washington Post and they'll tell you she's banned from politics just because she's in opposition to Maduro. But it's not that. Like I said, there are 10 opposing parties in Venezuela. She just represents one. She was barred for running for any office because of her multiple failed violent coups, for calling on foreign nations, including Israel and
Right,
Netanyahu, to invade Venezuela. And I don't know about you, but any political leader in any country who calls for another country to invade, I mean, that's going to be seen as treason, right?
right.
You know, when Trump asked Russia, "Hey, Russia, if you're listening," people thought of that as treason. So it's not so cut and dry, and
Mm.
that's what I try to bring to the table. I'm not a Maduro fan, so to speak. You know, I don't necessarily like the guy, but he's not my leader, right? I'm not here to tell Venezuelans who that we should kick him out and put in this other person.
Well, it's kind
if
of
Vene
funny, isn't it? We like democracy as long as it turns out like we want it to.
right, right, and that's one of the things that Machado has been criticized for all over the world is that her tactics aren't very democratic.
Hmm.
A lot of people say blame her for the lower turnouts in the elections in Venezuela because she calls to boycott elections all the time. But then when she sees fit, she chooses to tell people, we have to vote, we have to vote, we have to vote. Well, you keep doing that, and people are sitting here thinking, is it a trustworthy voting system or is it not a trustworthy voting system? So now you're disenfranchising voters and more people are staying home because what's the point? Last 2 years ago, she told us to boycott elections. Now she wants us to come and vote for this old dude who used to do terrorist attacks in Colombia, in El Salvador. Like the other connection that this is what makes these things so difficult in Latin America. The other connection between Machado and Nayib Bukele is deep, right? Machado is a nepo baby. She grew up in an embassy, right? She grew up in wealth and all these things, and her and Mudo Gonzalez's ties to um, terrorism in El Salvador and Colombia that date back for Gonzalez date back 40 years are pretty deep, and like they're tied to a lot of the elites in El Salvador who support Nayib Bukele steadily becoming a dictator by constantly changing the constitution so he can run for reelection when he's not supposed to. He's doing what Trump wants to do. And I tell people, a lot of people say that Trump is trying to mimic Viktor Orban in Hungary, but I point to them and I point to Javier Milei, I point to Nayib Bukele, and I'm like, no, dude, he's trying to do what they're doing. They're close, right here,
Mm.
and he's watching how Nayib Bukele is circumventing his constitution. Elon Musk backs all these things, like Steve Bannon, like all these people in these far right circles are behind these folks like Machado, and there's a reason for that. It's because like she is associated with like Jair Bolsonaro from Brazil, who's like a blatant Christian nationalist. She's gone and had meetings with Vox in Spain, more Christian white nationalists or anti-immigrant. Um, she's involved with all that, and on top of that, one of the things that really, really pisses me off about her is she helped Trump drive this narrative about Tren de Aragua here in the US, and she is one part of the reason why we're seeing ICE on the streets treating everybody like gang members because she was backing Trump up saying, "Yeah, they're all gang members. Yeah, that's why they're fleeing Venezuela. That's why they're coming to you." The whole tying Maduro to Tren de Aragua, she's behind that too.
Mm.
So like she's not she the part that really upsets me is the damage she did right here in our country. Um,
So
and
here's something, not to interrupt, but someone
no,
put
no, go
in
ahead.
the chat, and I was going to ask you this anyway. Why did she get the Nobel Peace Prize?
You
It
know,
just,
everybody
okay.
has
Now, before you answer, I mean, there's a history. Henry Kissinger got a Nobel Peace Prize. So,
right,
so it's not without precedent, but you just, okay, they didn't give it to Trump, but it's almost like they gave it to Trump light.
right. And a lot of Venezuelans, and I've seen this a lot on social media where they're saying the only election Machado's ever won was for the Nobel Peace Prize, and I lose my shit every time I see that because it's in
Huh.
Spanish, so it's so much funnier in Spanish. But but yeah, it's really again, they gave it to Kissinger, but I feel like the timing of it and I've said this on social media, whether intentional or not, because I can't prove if it's intentional. A lot of people think it is. The timing of it is what's suspect, right? You got Trump trying to threaten war, and now all of a sudden you have like even CBS News. Like I saw her on all the news channels, and they're portraying her as this anti-dictatorship person that they're making it very simple by just saying oversimplifying it by saying Maduro dictator, she anti-dictator. We should support her. But they're glossing over all these far right ties and all this, like Malay, for example, he started going after indigenous people's land again. They were protected under Malay, they're not. LGBTQ people under Malay protected, not protected before they were. And, he has privatized everything from public transport to all their infrastructure. So there's all these people making money, right? But Argentina's poverty dropped to 53% under Malay. I had to write some of these statistics down, and I had them in an article a while back, but there's like it's ridiculous what the damage that he's done, and this is why they need $20 billion, right? So 53% poverty rate, 70% of children are in poverty, 1 million kids go without dinner, 6 million people are in extreme poverty, and their total population is 45 million.
So I'll
So
put this. I'll put
it's
this in.
ridiculous.
We're talking about Argentina now, just to be
Right. Well, the thing is, I was going to tie real quick back was
okay.
Machado has said publicly that this is what she wants to do to Venezuela. She wants to privatize everything there. And, Venezuelans are paying pennies
Which
for fuel.
correct me if I'm wrong. So we're talking about socialism, essentially, are we not?
Right. Right.
Where the government owns the means of production. So
Yeah. I mean,
that just
that's
makes it
kind of
even
where,
crazier when you think about, on one hand, in the United States, the radical left is being called socialist, right? And yet we're supporting governments like the Argentinian government, which is straight up socialist.
right. Like
Help
they have
help
health.
me understand.
Yeah, like they have universal health care still. Malay wants to get rid of it, but he's gone after seniors' pensions. He's gone after all kinds of stuff. He shut down all kind Ministry of Education. Like he's gone after like the all the laws that address femicide and protect women from abuse and things like that.
Hmm.
And the whole time that he's sitting here privatizing everything and letting these billionaires run off with the profits that used to go to the state, people are starting to go hungry and they're starting to struggle. And it's to the point that he had to come and beg the United States for $20 billion.
Well,
And Trump obliged
what
him.
I read about that, and I guess we can talk about, maybe let's move to, our Argentina. So just to kind of frame it, I guess it was last week that it was all finalized that the United States basically gave Argentina a $20 billion bailout package, and we didn't write them a check, but what the Treasury Secretary did was what we call a swap. It was basically a
Right,
currency swap where the United States bought, or agreed to buy X number of pesos, their currency,
mhm,
which, in effect, we're propping up their currency.
right,
Now, and I'll have to, just sort of break this down later, maybe in the when we put this recording out. But they also agreed to purchase a certain amount of Argentinian debt. Now,
right,
the the obvious question is, well, why would we do that? Why are we bailing it? And of course, that goes back in part to what you just sort of brought up. Um, but at the same time, they're doing that. Basent, he used to work for George Soros, believe it or not. So he came out of the Wall Street, you know, the finance community, to put it mildly. Okay. One of the guys that worked with him, I believe his name is Citron or Citron, not sure how to pronounce it, but this guy is a hedge fund guy. And basically all he does is invest in, these, um, we call it junk debt, depressed debt, whatever. I mean, but it's high
right,
risk, really high risk. So in effect, we're bailing out Argentina, but we're also bailing out billionaire hedge funds at the same time who have
right,
invested in Argentina. And I believe it was Judd Legum, Popular Information. I guess I should give him a shout out because I think he was one of the first to really bring this up. And now you're seeing it in, just the legacy media. But This guy even bought once it came out that the United States was thinking about doing this. This guy actually loaded the boat and bought
Yeah.
even more bought even more debt. So now back up a step. Why did Argentina need this money? Part of it is policy, which you've outlined, but another part of it is in the first Trump administration, Trump pressed is either the IMF or the World Bank. I think it was the World Bank, not sure, but they basically loaded them up with a whole bunch of debt. That's where a lot of this debt comes from.
Right.
And it was more, what happens with a lot of these countries, and we maybe that's a subject for a different conversation, shall we say, but there's a history of third world third world nations being overloaded with massive amounts of debt
Yeah.
that they can never pay back, and that is how we and by that I mean capitalism, the hegemony, whatever you want to call it, right? That's how we keep control of these countries because they got more debt than they ever can pay back. And when you're talking about the World Bank, who runs the World Bank really? I think I'm not sure who the president of the World Bank is now, but for the longest time, and it may still be the case, the president of the World Bank is always American, always.
Right.
So anyway, not to go too far into the weeds on it, but that's kind of the backstory on why Argentina is in partly in the shape that they're in, and you combine that with guys raping and pillaging their country's resources, and we're where we are right now.
Right, right, right. And this is why I jumped at the chance to do this live with you because you got the economics,
Ooh.
of all of this. And when you look at how, for example, and not to jump back and forth between Venezuela and Argentina and El Salvador and all that, but again, it's really hard to talk about one without the other. You know, Venezuela nationalized their oil industry in 79, I believe. 77 or
That sounds
79.
right.
Yeah, it's been nationalized for a long time. And, the West has been trying or the US has been trying to fight against that for since it happened. When Chavez took over, a lot of that money started going towards indigenous communities and, all the other communities that were never
Hmm.
included in the profits of everything. Um, trying to roll Argentina was similar in a lot of ways. A lot of their stuff was nationalized. So I don't know what Argentinians are paying for fuel right now, but like Walter Reen went to Venezuela in the last year or two, and he was talking about how at the gas station gas is like 20 cents a gallon. And that's
Hmm.
because the oil industry and everything is owned by the people there. To ride transport, like metro rail or buses or anything like that is like 20 cents. Our 20 cents, right? 20 cents for us. Machado wants to go in and do what Malay did and privatize all of that and make it, for profit industries. And all of a sudden, when you really do, somebody did the numbers, they were saying that, paying a quarter to drive to ride the metro is going to cost you $2 in her economy. So, like, when you look at Argentina and Venezuela and several other countries, the social programs are what people are trying to protect the most because that's what they benefit from. They are not interested in a full-blown takeover by the United States or going from Maduro to another extremist on the other end of the spectrum who's going to take all
Right.
these things away from us. So, you look at a lot of the Latin American countries, and that's what we're faced with. These are things we don't discuss in the US. And I talked to someone in my replies recently who's from Europe, and they were talking about how in Europe everybody knows these things. And they think that it's so crazy that in the United States everybody got behind Maria Corina Machado without knowing who she is. They're like, we all know who she is. We all know she doesn't deserve that. We don't need to have a debate about it. But in the meantime, I'm over here and I'm trying to explain to people why she shouldn't get it, and all of a sudden, I'm a communist. I'm a Maduro
Dude, I
supporter. I'm a
saw you were
Trumper.
taking
I'm like, bro,
a whole lot of income, and I tried to help.
yeah, yeah,
But
that,
I like
and
I
that's the
said, I will admit when I am wrong about something, and I
Right.
I just kind of took a superficial look. Venezuelan woman gets the Nobel Peace Prize without really thinking, well, what does she stand for? You know.
Right.
So I think that's one of the things that's great about platforms like this, where it's a writer's first platform, or a
Right.
content creator's platform, and we all sort of can depend on each other for different things. Um, and so yeah, I really appreciated that, and all it took was 10 minutes on Google. you know,
Right. Right.
Chat
Right. And
GPT. Who is this woman? Is she right wing? you
and
know,
a lot of the things you'll see on Google now, and I don't know, I'm guessing this is probably intentional, but it seems like it's harder and harder to find the real information about her. And a lot of it is because of all the recent news flooding the internet too, so it kind of
Sure.
buries her history a little bit. But it's all out
It's
there,
it's
you
starting
know?
to come out now. I took a look this morning, and you're seeing, I mean, I don't, I think it was Politico or one of them, and they literally referred to her as a far right politician or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
I
I
mean, because
saw.
and you're probably in some way maybe responsible for that, because that's one of the things social media is good for. Every once in a while is kind of drowning out the misinformation.
Yeah, and I saw NPR called her far right too. And, there's no, I can't remember his name now. Anyway, there's a Dutch diplomat here on Substack, an
Mm,
ex-diplomat. And I read his article about Machado, and he's a diplomat, right? So you gotta
he's
expect
going to be diplomat.
diplom right, you gotta expect that.
Mm,
And I respected the article. He tried to, explain her far right views and some of her associations. He kind of skipped over the whole associations with like these really hardcore groups like Vox and in Spain and things like that, and Maloney in Italy. Um, and at the end, he still was holding on to the idea that she is someone who's trying to fight a dictatorship. Trump is someone trying to create a dictatorship. So her giving him praise kind of doesn't fly. And I was like, that's kind of
do
where you
you
missed the
think?
point
Do you
because she
think?
is him.
Do you think part of what she's doing is what virtually all these other countries are doing with regard to tariffs, where if you praise Trump, it doesn't take much, right? And I just in reading up on her, and I'm not minimalizing her views at all, but I
Right,
feel
right.
like there's a large part of the whole interaction with Trump is puffing him up, because everybody knows that works, praising him. I'm dedicating this to you, Mr. Trump, and we need, because anybody can see we're looking for an excuse with Venezuela
Right.
anyway. And she seems to be trying to position herself as, when the bombs start falling, when the dust settles, she's going to be the person that wins, so to speak. Knowing that there are, like you said, 10 different other parties. Maybe that's what I just feel like to some extent that's what I was seeing when I just looked at
Yeah.
her, you know, she's pitched the White House something related to US, because Trump's doing the same. It sounded like the same kind of deal that we've done with all these companies, where the US is getting 10% here and 5% there. And so I'm sure it's going to come out with what she pitched, but she had to top what and what's happened now in the last week. Correct me if I'm wrong. We've broken off relations with Venezuela, or at least conversations with Venezuela. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it sounds like she's just trying to squeeze in and seize that little opportunity, that little crack in the door.
right. She's been involved with every White House since George W. Bush.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so, the whole not to, not to be crass, but the whole brown nosing aspect of it is certainly there. Certainly
Mm.
there. Yeah, it's easy to manipulate Trump just by praising him. Um, and yeah, in the situation that we're in, um, it's kind of not surprising that they broke off communication. that, she's there to give them justification to go to war. I don't expect, um, I don't expect us to send troops in there or anything like that. What I would expect if we do anything is gonna be precision type strikes on, like, oil refineries and things like
Yeah.
that.
I mean, it
Um,
won't take much, let's face it. I mean,
no,
not
it won't, it won't. The thing is, again, one of the points that I've been bringing up here recently, when everybody keeps saying, "But most Venezuelans hate Maduro." Think about this for a second. The man has a $50 million bounty on his head. He's handing out AK-47s to the population. Does that sound like a guy who's worried or afraid of his people? No, because he wouldn't be giving them guns.
mm.
So they're going to defend their country. Maybe they don't like Maduro, but they really don't like US intervention a whole lot
Yeah, I
more than they
mean,
hate that guy.
it's it's not like they're saying, "Yeah, we dislike him so much, we really would like, colonization."
Right.
Yeah,
That's
we
exactly, and that's
because that's
another thing.
basically what we're looking at, right?
Right, right. You look at what Venezuela is, and Venezuela is unique, right? You can't call it a communist country or just a flat out socialist country. It's a Bolivarian republic built on the ideas of Simon Bolivar, who liberated like a dozen countries in Latin America from Spanish control.
Mm,
And there's a very anti-colonialist and anti-imperialist aspect to that. It's built around those ideas. So while what the West calls socialism, in Venezuela, it's a sense of community. It's a sense of making sure everyone is taken care of. Sure, we call that socialism, but in most places, it's just humanity. And for people don't understand what a Bolivarian state is. So like Cuba is somewhat similar because they're built on the anti-colonialist and anti-imperialist views of Jose Marti, who fought Spaniards and ran them off with help of the US. But part of Marti's deal was that if we're going to run off Spain and the US is going to help us, we can't let the US come in here and take Spain's place. Well,
mhm,
Jose Marti died in battle, um, and the U.S. came in and did exactly what he didn't want them to do. So since then, there was in Cuba, there's always been this push to get the U.S. out, and the U.S. refuses to leave, and
mhm,
that's the problem, right? You look at Venezuela; that's what they're trying to avoid. They don't want the help from the U.S. They don't want the U.S. in their country because they know that once they're in there, it's going to be impossible to get them out. The US operates out of 8 Colombian bases in Colombia, right? As a joint operation. The operation is to counter narco trafficking. They've been there since the early 2000s, and narco trafficking has nothing but tripled since then. So, like you read about military involvement in drug smuggling, all you gotta do is look to Colombia, right? Like they're
mhm,
there, they're not stopping it, they're making it worse. So again, Colombia's Venezuela's neighbor, they don't want that. They don't want that in their country because once you let the US in, they don't leave. It's like a cancer. Um, and that's what they're gonna fight against. And what people don't seem to understand is that if the United States attacks Venezuela, Venezuela is a combative country, always has been. The Bolivarian Republic, that's when that started and they're ready to fight. People don't realize that. People think that the United States is doing some benevolent thing by overthrowing Maduro. Well, maybe they'll get in there, maybe they'll assassinate him, but that doesn't mean you just took over the country. You still have 20 million people that are heavily armed to contend with. The country was heavily armed before Maduro gave them guns, now even more so, and there's ammunition galore. So, Venezuela has the support of China and Russia has a lot of more advanced weapons than the US does in a lot of aspects. Venezuela uses Iranian boats that are part of its navy, and like there's Venezuela's not a punk. They have American jets in their air force.
mm, okay.
Yeah, sure, we can overpower them, militarily,
But
but
it's
it's
not
gonna
gonna
be
just be a cakewalk, in other words.
no, not at all, not at all. And then when you consider, like we touched on how, Chevron is in Venezuela. You have ExxonMobil who's drilling for natural gas in disputed waters, right?
Mhm,
Um, and technically, when there's disputed waters, You wait till that plays out, till the dispute is settled, and you don't go drilling on what could be another country's, oil fields. Well, the US is backing ExxonMobil and they're letting them creep further and further into those disputed waters. And when all this hype about Venezuela and Guyana maybe going to war over these disputed waters, that's what it was about. It was about the United States allowing ExxonMobil access to those disputed waters. It wasn't Maduro trying to colonize Guyana or anything like that. It was because the U.S. is pushing ExxonMobil in there. Chevron participates in getting that gas from there to other parts of the world. Chevron is shipping oil out of Venezuela. And then, if you go in and you start bombing, this is where it becomes a problem for the United States. If you start bombing oil facilities, you have no choice but to hit
But
Chevron
you're
facilities.
screwing up
Right.
your own corporation.
So there's a huge contradiction going on right now. And the debate is, I read an article yesterday from an economist and geopolitical analyst from a university in Mexico, and she talked about how Venezuela sits on the westernmost belt. There's like a belt of oil fields that go all the way to China. And if you look at that belt across, you'll see where all these wars are happening. At the
Hmm.
middle of that belt is Sudan, with access to the Red Sea. Sudan has almost as much oil as Venezuela, and she attributes the civil war there to Western powers being involved and keeping that country destabilized. Because as long as the country's destabilized, the U.S. can move in there and do whatever it wants, like it did in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and things like that. So,
Yeah. And
that was
don't sleep on Exxon. I mean, Exxon operates
yeah,
like its own sovereign nation
it
to a
does.
large extent. There's a book I read some years ago by a guy, I think his name is Stephen Call, Coll. And I've read a couple of his books, but one was specifically about Exxon and how, they've got their own, um, military, I guess you could
They
say.
do.
They've got so when they go, and they were at the time, I think it was Chad that they were talking about, or this guy was talking about. So, just to kind of skip back to Argentina, someone made the comment in the chat that, basically America's stupid. Well, there, I actually wrote this the other day. If there's one thing that's going to save us in this whole movement that's going on towards authoritarianism, fascism. Again, you pick your your far right terminology. What's going to end up saving us is that these guys they're just not the smartest guys. And
Right.
I thought Besant, I think I gave him a lot of credit just because of where he came from. But think about this. So you do this deal with Argentina and take away his motivation to help his boys out and all that kind of thing. Argentina sells soybeans. They got to be in the top four in soybean production.
I was going to mention that.
And you don't put a caveat. You're giving these guys money and you don't put a caveat, like a non compete. You don't put
Right,
that
right.
in the deal. And so, why do I say this? Because what happens? We bail these guys out. And once the deal is done, what does Argentina do? They remove all of their barriers to doing business with China, and China loads the boat with Argentinian soybeans. And our farmers are sitting over here looking like, hey, what about us?
If
If
I
they had
if
really see, that's the kind of thing that makes me think. I was on I was on a live stream last week with some guys at um, Blue Amp Media,
Yeah,
uh,
I watched that. It was
and
good.
David Schuster and Cliff Schefter. And at some point, this came up, and one of them asked me, did I think this was being, all of this chaos was being done on purpose? And to some degree, I think, well, first of all, I just think these guys are raiding the cookie jar. Number one,
Right.
that's
Right.
just put that up top. But Besant is smart enough to know that you don't leave yourself exposed in this way. If he was thinking about the folks who voted for him, I mean, come on, let's face it, the farmers are the people who put this guy. You're not going to find any left wing farmers in Arkansas. Okay,
Right.
maybe some of the black farmers, if anything, but this is literally, I mean, almost to the T, a replay of what happened the first time he was in office. He went into a trade war with China, doing all these tariffs, nearly collapsed the agricultural industry. And whatever money he took in from tariffs, they ended up just using that money to bail the farmers back out. So we didn't really get anything out of it. In fact, I was looking, this was something I wrote about, back when it happened. And the amount of money that it took to bail out farmers was like, more than the budget of some of the agencies that at the time that we had. And so now we're seeing the same thing happen again. And it's bad, man. I mean, you got
Yeah.
farmers right now committing suicide. And the worst of it hasn't even happened yet. You saw, I think it was yesterday or the day before. Now we put 100% tariff on China again. That's why the stock market was off so big yesterday or Friday.
Yeah. Yeah, a couple things, with the Argentina deal, when Malay took over, he was, "We're cutting all ties with all communist countries, including China, blah, blah, blah," right? And then within like a few months, he was like, "Well, let me backpedal on that a little bit." And, China's buying their stuff, probably soybeans, um, as part of it. The other thing is, this is the same thing that we see regarding U.S. farmers in Cuba. U.S. farmers want to do business with Cuba. They want to be able to sell their product to Cuba. The United States won't. And I've heard a lot of farmers, right-wing farmers and all that stuff who've been to Cuba for these conventions about, being able to work with the Cuban government. And they're just like, is it really freedom when my government tells me who I can and can't sell my product to? And I was like, "Damn, that's a really good one."
Hmm.
And
So
and
what
it
happened
started
to the
opening.
free market capitalism thing, huh?
Right, and then it started opening my eyes to a lot of things. So when they say, "Oh, you can't send money to Cuba to your family because you're both," is that freedom? I can't send money to Cuba now because why? Because you say that by me helping my family, I'm somehow supporting the Cuban government? That doesn't even track, man. Like, come on. You
So
send
I
them
think
some money so they
something
can
else
get some groceries.
again,
It's
man, I don't know. The only thing that makes me think that this is not completely like part of a plan. I mean, yeah, you got the Project 2025 stuff. We all know about that. But I'm talking
right.
about in practice, the way these guys, actually do some of the stuff. It's not
Yeah.
in the smartest way. I mean, think about this. Okay. So we're talking about farmers. What USAID? What's it all about? It's basically giving our surplus production to
Right.
countries that that we want to keep from sinking into totalitarianism, authoritarianism, so whatever, right? That's the whole purpose. Well, we've
Right.
destroyed that.
Right.
So these farmers, they can't they can't really sell their excess production to the government because we don't have the agencies anymore.
Right.
They've screwed. So I mean, every time I hear these guys, complaining, I listen to them, I feel I feel bad for them.
I do.
But at the
Yeah,
same
I do
time,
too.
this is what he said he was going to do.
Right.
I told him, people like you told him, anybody who would listen, the guy is coming with the tariffs, and that's going to make all our shit more expensive. And if you're growing stuff, you know, he's going to hurt you. And you would think
Yeah,
after this happened, his first term, farmers would be a little bit, look, man, all right, I get you're racist and you didn't want to vote for the black lady, but protect yourself.
yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. We were told that we were being alarmist, right? We were
I know
told that we were being hyperbolic about what Trump was going to do. And I'm not an I told you so guy, but like the first few months I was all out I told you so, and so were a lot of us. We were like we told you,
it wasn't just us,
so
Arturo. It was any economist
right,
that knows how
right.
to add and subtract was telling them. And I wrote about it and I referenced a lot of this material where guys were saying, "Look, okay, here's what Kamala Harris is saying she's going to do. Here's what this guy is saying he's going to do," and they just didn't listen. And now they're surprised that he did what he said he was going to do.
Yeah, it blows me away. It's the same thing with Latinos in my community, and it's just so crazy, everybody, "Oh, he's just gonna go after the criminals." No, he isn't, bro. Like, do you not understand how dog whistles work?
Oh my
He's coming
goodness, man.
after all of us.
This is
Yeah,
going to
it's
go
it's
down in history as one of the biggest, leopard eating people's faces situations
yeah,
ever. Because I'm telling you, it's everywhere you look. I, it makes me really nervous that he doesn't care anymore about hurting his own people than he seems to, because many of his policies are going to, sort of the outsized, you know, persons that are going to be affected. It's overwhelmingly in red states. New
yeah,
York's going to be
yeah,
fine in the soybean situation. California's going to be fine. So you
yeah.
just have to wonder what the end game is. Now, part of it, look, technically, he's not supposed to run again. So it's almost like, hey, I don't have to get elected again. So what the fuck? Who cares?
Right.
At the same time, I am not convinced he's going to try to run some kind of way, you know,
Didn't
or maybe
someone did
maybe just won't have an election.
didn't right, didn't a Republican introduce legislation a couple months ago? I want to say Randy
Oh
Fine.
yeah,
I'm
to allow him
probably
to run.
yeah,
I
because
remember
it,
he
it
did.
wasn't right because it wasn't two consecutive terms. That's some naive
I
Bukele
don't.
type
I
stuff.
mean, no, really.
Right, right. So, yeah, I don't. It like you said, if we have an election, I'd be surprised if there isn't some sort of attempt to even stop the midterms.
Oh,
Because they're
I think that's this whole thing of us. Him putting National Guard and military troops in all these cities
yeah,
is. Remember, last time he was in office, he was talking about seizing voting machines.
mhm.
So,
Didn't
eh, look, we can start to wrap up, but just one last thing that just sort of on this same topic. Again, haven't had a chance to dig too much, but what I know is it's scary. Dominion voting systems that sued Fox News, got what almost $1 billion, right?
yeah,
Was just bought by a MAGA centric
yeah,
ex election official. We don't know how he paid for it, don't know how he bought it, where his money came from, wasn't disclosed. But Dominion voting systems is used, I think, in 28 states.
yeah.
Now,
I believe that's right.
not necessarily statewide, but they got a big footprint. And so when you talk about, you just start adding up the pieces, military in all these major cities that just so happen to be in opposition. Here's a guy over, oh, you know what? He's talking about paper ballots. I mean, paper
Yeah,
ballots, dude. You're talking about weeks of not knowing who won.
right, right.
So why would you buy Dominion voting systems if you're talking about paper ballots? I do not know. This is something I'm looking at. I've got a queue, and one thing about this whole moment is so many things happen that are so important. I'll start writing and I get 500 words into it, and some other shit happens. I go, well, boy, that seems more important than this thing. I need to put this to the side
Happens.
and circle
Yeah.
back. you know, like I didn't intend to be talking about Venezuela and Argentina 3 days ago, but
Right.
you
Right.
gotta be out there on top of this stuff.
Yeah,
So,
and that's I have to pick and choose my things too because, so everybody's reporting on what ICE is doing to civilians on the street. I'm glad they are. It's about time. ICE has always been a very violent organization. They are definitely more violent now,
I
but
mentioned
I'm
the other
glad.
day someone, I forget what the context was, but you know, what is it? Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when she first came into Congress, AOC was saying we need to abolish ICE, and everybody was looking at her like she was crazy.
Yeah,
Well,
because
what you got
she
to say?
She lived in a community where she probably saw how they act, just like we do here in Houston. We've seen what ICE does, and they're a violent group of people, a violent agency. And what I was leading to is that I'm glad everybody else is covering this because that means I don't have to, and I could focus on some of this other stuff. So there's the same thing with hate groups. I stopped focusing on the little hate groups in the communities and started focusing on the people who drive them. And that's billionaire funders, politicians, everybody all the way to the White House. And it's the same scenario here. There's a lot of corruption in the White House with ICE and DHS. That's an agency that I've always covered very deeply. So I'm, still bugging them, still going in on them, and still, that because once you start highlighting what they're doing behind the scenes, it explains what they're doing in the streets, and
Hmm.
it kind of shows you where they're headed with this. So when I recently reported about Rodney Scott being at that meeting with the generals with Hegseth and stuff, my first question was to see Customs and Border Patrols. Why was he there? He's not a general. He belongs to a federal agency. There's a clear line that divides, his authority and their authority. It's called the 10th Amendment, right? The 10th
Hmm.
Amendment also that separates, federal power from state power, and they wouldn't answer that question. And then I started getting leads, and then I started hearing from people, and then I started finding out what the agenda was based on a memo, and it explains what is going on with the military on the streets. And that's where my focus has been. Same with Venezuela, same with all this stuff that is, especially with Cuba, that it's affecting my people, my family, here and there. Um, it's just it's just extremely problematic, and the whole Dominion thing, like you said, is extremely scary.
Yeah,
Like what does that leave us as voters? Can we even trust that anymore? I mean, most people didn't really trust it fully in the first place.
yeah. Well,
So it's
that
weird.
blew me away when I
Yeah,
ran across this. But so Arturo, man, it's always a pleasure. I always learn
it
a heck.
is, bro.
Tell people how to how to find you, how to
Well,
subscribe to your newsletter.
my newsletters, Decolonized Journalism. You can find me pretty much everywhere. I use the same username at Extreme Arturo, one word. And right now I'm doing a 35% off sale. You could subscribe for $35 a year forever. Um,
Oh
and
man,
that
my
ends.
my my sale is only 20% off. Now I got to
Oh
go fix.
well, you've had some sales, man. You've
Yeah,
done pretty
thanks for
good,
a
but
long time.
but
Like
yeah, I'm gonna
30% off.
that one ends tomorrow, and then I may have another sale come around the holidays or something like that. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
35 bucks a year
I might
forever.
wait a couple of months just because there's so much going on and you just want to be visible, but it's
Yeah,
hard to. You can't really sustain it. That's something I found out because every paid subscriber, I don't know if people know this, but you get a paid subscription. Substack gets their 10% right off the top, and then you got to process it, with Stripe, which is the
yeah,
payment system that they use. And so, when you get too cheap, you might as well not even charge, or not even
right,
take the money, because you're not going to see very much, especially the monthly. I'm only
right.
the thing is, and I always have to say this. Um, it doesn't really matter who, but one of the celebrity type newsletters, I was reading it earlier today, and it was I forget the exact topic, but it was something worth reading. And then I ran into, about, I don't know, 500 or 600 words in, paywall. You will never find a paywall on the Journeyman, and I don't think you'll find one on decolonized journalism, right?
Now,
I don't
what
do
I
the pay.
do it yeah, my
Go ahead.
paid subscribers get everything immediately when it publishes. And then my free subscribers get it at 8 o'clock Eastern time the next morning. And that's how I do it. I
Excellent.
try to keep it free for everybody, but I try to give my paid subs some sort of benefits. You know, you got to be a paid sub to comment on the article itself. But I leave my notes open for my free subscribers so we can have conversations. A lot of times I will do leave my comments open, like for the Fetterman article, because I wanted to get a bigger and broader feel of what my audience
Mhm.
felt about, where Fetterman is these days. And, unsurprisingly, a lot of people are not happy with that guy right now. So,
Yeah,
you
he
know,
was a Trojan horse, was he not?
yeah, yeah, I think he was. And I mean, I tried to warn about that, but I always focus on, black women, man. They tried to
Yeah.
tell us. They
Yep.
tried to tell us.
Well, man,
Yeah,
again, it's been a pleasure. It's Sunday. I know you got
same.
family and all that kind of stuff. My
Man,
son's home for the long weekend, so I'm gonna try to hang with him for a little bit before we have to get him back to school. So,
yeah,
this is great. Folks, this will be out. I'll try to get it out in the next day or so as far as the recording. And I'll also, what I always do is things that I've written, Arturo, if there's something in particular, DM me a link and I'll drop it in there. Um, but I just thought this was a necessary conversation given what
I think so, yeah.
was going on. So, as it develops, I'll be calling on you again, man.
What's up, man? I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, well, folks, thanks for showing up. We appreciate it again. Subscribe, become paid subscribers if you can't. Share it with your friends. Help us get the word out.
Absolutely.
All right,
Right on.
take care, folks.
Bye, y'all. Have a good Sunday.
Bye.